Hi everyone, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School and happy lunch break. I am currently on my lunch break filming this video, and that's why the lighting is a little bit weird. I feel like I'm being attacked by this sunbeam, but that's okay. It'll move on its own, and we have a lot to talk about today. I have read another 10 books, so I'm gonna do a book review of those. I'm gonna try and keep my reviews a little more succinct. It's difficult for me, but I'm gonna try. And before we get into those books, I also just wanted to quickly show you a couple that I got in the mail from Simon & Schuster. I'm gonna be mailing some of them to students. I do a lot of little competitions and games and contests and stuff with my students right now since we're doing online learning, and it's a little hard to keep them engaged, but the prize is usually a book that I send to them. So since I get so many from publishers, which is so wonderful, but students can't access them in my room, I mail them to the winners. So just very quickly, these are the books that I received. I have read this one already. I love it. It's called Look Both Ways by Jason Reynolds. I've reviewed it in another video. I forget which one, but if you scroll back a ways, you could find it or find it on my Instagram. This one is new to me. It's called Muffled. I love the color. This one looks like fantasy. It's called Kenny and the Book of Beasts. This one just has the cutest artwork. It's a sequel to another one that has kind of a similar title. This is Just Beyond the Very, Very Far North. It's adorable. It's kind of for younger kids, maybe upper elementary. This one my students were very excited about. This is Spy School Revolution. All of my 6th graders are very into the Spy School series. This one is a graphic novel called Journey Under the Arctic, and it looks really cool on the inside. And lastly, I'll be keeping this one because I actually haven't read it yet. I feel like I'm the only English teacher who has never read this. Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down. It's always been on my list, I just hadn't gotten around to it, so this one is for me. Another fun thing that just arrived at my doorstep, I made these stickers with my niece last week. She's a 6th grader and she loves to read, so I was telling her about this concept of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. So we made a little sticker out of it. I just thought these were so cute, and the idea behind these metaphors is a mirror is a book that kind of reflects your own experience back to you, and a window is a book where you get to kind of see through somebody else's eyes into the way that they live, and a sliding door is just a portal into a new world. I found that my students like thinking of books in this way. It helps them to explain what kind of book they're looking for or what they want to read next, and I've found that rather than focusing too much on genre, it's kind of nice to just focus on these 3 categories and ask students to read a little bit from all 3. So anyway, these are available on my website on www.toocoolformiddleschool.com, and I need to find, some free space on my laptop over there because I really like this one. Okay, let's get into the book reviews. These books are number 71 through 80 of 2020, and it is mid-November right now, so the big question is, can I read 20 more by December 31st? Do I think I can read 100 in 1 year? I don't know. I didn't really have a goal. Well, my goal was 50 books for the year, but pandemic and quarantine, so I've read a ton. So we'll see. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below if you think I can do it. I'm not gonna beat myself up too much if I don't hit the 100 book mark. But anyway, let's talk about these ones. A few of them are amazing, wonderful, life-changing, probably, top books that I've ever read. And then a few of them were kind of meh, but other people might like them. I always feel bad not recommending a book. I'll give you my thoughts, but it might just be something that somebody else wants to read. I'll leave the decision up to you, but I'll let you know what I think. Book number 71 for the year is called Unpack Your Impact by Naomi O'Brien and Lanisha Tabb, who I have followed on Instagram forever and ever. You guys might know them as Read Like a Rockstar and Apron Education. I highly recommend this book to any elementary school teachers, to every elementary school administrator, and everyone who is in college, working on their teacher credential or whatever. I really think you would be so far ahead of the game if you came into your teaching career thinking about a lot of these things. It's nice and short. It's not gonna, take you a ton of time to read, but they really pack a punch. They include so much wisdom, so many concrete ideas, specific answers to questions that a lot of teachers are gonna have. A lot of veteran teachers are kind of relearning how to approach curriculum about things like Thanksgiving and Black History Month and culture and diversity and all of that. So this book would be very, very helpful for them. But again, I think if you're a new teacher, it would be great to just go in with this kind of a perspective. It could be really, really powerful. I think this book will be very, very powerful in the hands of like new teachers coming into the profession. So I highly recommend it, and I'm really hoping that plenty of elementary teachers pick it up because the focus is all on social studies. And so if they are getting a really, really strong foundation in elementary school, it just makes my job that much easier and more effective in middle school. Book number 72 is Roll With It by Jamie Sumner. I was trying to read a few books lately that are more of like the upper elementary, maybe young middle school age, just to be a little more familiar with like the lexile level that people write from and just kind of the way things are done. This one was really, really good. It's about a girl with cerebral palsy and she lives in the South. She ends up moving to Oklahoma from Tennessee, and I really liked that she lives in a trailer park with her grandparents. I feel like that's not really a perspective that we see very often in YA literature, and it was nice to see that experience in a book. So again, for some of your students, that might be a really important mirror to see their own life experience in a book, or it could be a window that gives other students a bit of empathy and compassion and understanding and even just like appreciation, you know, for somebody who lives in a different way than they do. Another thing that I really liked about this book was that everybody in the book needs help and everyone is able to offer help and they're valuable to the people around them. So it doesn't focus solely on Ellie's disability and the fact that she's in a wheelchair. She has strengths that are valuable to other people around her, and she also needs the help of other people as well. So I really like that theme in this book. This one, The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas, is one of my like all-time favorite teaching books for secondary English teachers. If you teach middle or high school English, you need to read this book. I absolutely loved it. If you loved like literary theory, like lit analysis and all of that in college, if you were an English major, you're really, really gonna enjoy this book. There's an introduction where she lays out her theories and it's just like, it's so freaking good. And then there are 4 chapters where she applies her theories to specific books and TV shows. So the 4 things that she kind of analyzes are Mockingjay, so the Hunger Games, Gwen in BBC's Merlin, Bonnie Bennett in The Vampire Diaries, and then like the fan fiction world of Harry Potter. That chapter is really, really fascinating, and it's kind of the most personal from her. I have so much highlighted in here. Oh my goodness, I don't even know like where to begin. But this book definitely gave me a greater appreciation for the fantasy genre. So those like sliding door books where you're just immersed into a completely different world. She describes these kinds of stories, you know, asks, could they offer catharsis for some of our most pressing human problems? Might they help us collectively imagine our world anew? And I really hadn't thought of fantasy that way, but she also critiques fantasy and how we've typically done it with typically white characters and typically kind of like European landscapes, kind of like Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Harry Potter, all of that. And so she asks, what happens when there are Black characters in fantasy? How do authors typically handle them, treat them? And then also, how does the audience react to these characters and to these like plot arcs? And one thing that really stood out to me is this idea of like hesitation. So the author is building this whole new world for you in a fantasy novel or like a fantasy TV show or movie, and we usually like agree to believe what we're reading, but then what causes hesitation? So she looks at, for example, Rue being black in the Hunger Games and the outrage that so many people voiced on Twitter. Like, why did we go along with this whole like apocalyptic society has been separated into these 12 districts and teens, you know, battle each other to the death? Why do we believe all of that, but we won't believe that Rue is black? Why does that disturb us from our belief? And then like in BBC's Merlin, it's not weird when there's a talking dragon, but a lot of people tried to put forth all of these like academic arguments for why Gwen couldn't be black. So it's just a fascinating look at pop culture and literature and critical race theory and literary theory and just all of this together, and how we sort of collectively push stories forward, especially with like fandoms and fan fiction and the ability to talk about shows on Twitter and Tumblr and create fan art and all of that, and just this new way that we are so much more involved with our stories, like kind of from a global perspective. And it usually happens more with like young adult literature. Teenagers are really creative and get really into fan fiction and fan art and all of that. So this also gave me a new appreciation for that whole world, and I'm actually trying to work that more into my teaching. We're doing a fan fiction project right now. So anyway, highly, highly, highly recommend. Love it, love it. So much for being succinct, huh? Okay, right after I read that one, I read Song Below Water by Bethany Morrow. This was really cool to read because I could tell that Bethany C. Morrow had read The Dark Fantastic, because she explicitly lays out in her plot like some of the theories that Ebony Elizabeth Thomas presents in her book. So I could see that like happening, and it was really cool to see those theories come to life in practice. This book is about two black girls who live in Portland. And it's like magic Portland. Like there are magical beings like sirens and sprites and gargoyles, and people just kind of roll with it, I guess. Like it's just kind of accepted, although people persecute sirens more than anybody else. And there's a network of people that kind of like protect them. There are a lot of contemporary parallels. So sometimes you step out of the magic a little bit into pretty clear critiques of like the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff. I was like intentionally trying to make sure that I wasn't hesitating in any of my acceptance of the book after just reading The Dark Fantastic. But I will say, if I have to critique anything with this book, I couldn't really follow like how all of the magical beings are connected. So sirens are from like Greek mythology, and then gargoyles are like a gothic thing, and then there are sprites in the story that are, you know, like just I think of like a fairy tale, just like fairies. So I don't have like a reference point for how those magical creatures would interact. Are they enemies? Are they allies? Is there some kind of like a hierarchy? Like there wasn't a sense of how they were connected, or like why they have just remained in the world, I guess. There was like this really interesting reference to like the civil rights movement, and in this book that is pretty much led by like sirens. So I feel like it's a good start to this new world, but I didn't think it was really fully fleshed out. I'm hoping that there's like a book 2 or maybe even a prequel that just kind of like fills in the world a little bit more, because it's like mostly the real world, and then I don't know, it's a little bit hard to tie in the magic because like not everybody's magical. But I think for like teenagers, they're just gonna read it and I don't know, maybe not question those things as much. I don't know, maybe not. They can be very picky about their fantasy and their mythology and that kind of stuff too. But overall, it's just really well written. It's really fun to read. This would make a great addition to your library. And sometimes people want to know this. There's no cussing or like sex scenes or anything like that in this book. I'm not totally opposed to a book if there is, but this one doesn't have any of that kind of stuff, so you can put it on your classroom bookshelf and not have to worry. Book number 75 is Letters from Cuba by Ruth Behar, and this book is based on the author's family's journey as Jewish refugees from Poland to Cuba. So the historical background of this was really, really interesting. I didn't realize that there was like a Jewish diaspora in Cuba, and then there was also a Nazi movement in Cuba as well. So it's really cool to learn more about World War II and even like Holocaust history from like a South American perspective, because they were absolutely involved as well, and I think this is a really interesting perspective to take. It's written at a fairly young level, and so the language is not incredibly interesting to me. I mean, everybody just says exactly what they mean. There's not much like nuance in the language or anything. It's structured as like letters from a young girl, so she's just writing things like exactly as they occur. So for young readers, this is really perfect. They'll be able to follow it well and understand a pretty like complex global conflict, I think. And then like as a teacher, this would be a fun book to teach, just because there's so much history, so much culture, so much intersection within the story itself. So if any maybe like 4th, 5th grade teachers, something like that, end up reading this with your class, let me know how that goes, because I feel like it would be so interesting. Book number 76 was another like upper elementary. I wouldn't even say this is like a middle school book. This is called Saucy by Cynthia Katahata. She wrote another book that's like a historical fiction book that I really keep meaning to read. It is on my shelf at school. So I thought I would just like get a sense of her writing, and I wanted to read this because of the cute little piggy on it. And I raised pigs growing up, so I was like, ooh, I would love to read a book about that. I thought it would be kind of a mirror, but it was more of a fun house mirror. As somebody who has quite a bit of experience raising little piglets, this was just so inaccurate. And I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. It's more about like the girl's family. She is a quadruplet, and then there's her parents and their grandmother. So it's kind of more of just like the story of a family's adventures raising this little pig, but it's just that's not how this would have gone. It's kind of weird. So I mean, I don't really recommend this, but it did remind me of like how maybe sometimes like we think a book is a mirror for a student, but if it's not like an own voices author, then sometimes they might be reading it and being like, no, this is not actually how it is. So it just reminded me of the value of own voice authors, because in the back here it says she lives in California with 2 humans, 2 dogs, 2 lizards, and no pigs. And I was like, well, clearly. I could have guessed. But for just like a little family story, whatever, it's cute. I was probably too critical of it because I know about pigs. Okay, taking the sharpest of turns that we can possibly take, the next book that I read was Red Pill by Hari Kunzru. This was the October Amory's Book Club pick. I'm just gonna have to do a few spoilers with this book because I just need to talk about it. I need to tell you what this is about. I hope that you'll read it. If you don't want any spoilers, just fast forward until you don't see me holding this one up anymore. First of all, this is just like mind-blowingly well written. One review from the New York Times said Kunzru can do more or less what he wants with language, and it is very true. Like, it's just really astonishing to read something this well written. The idea behind the book is there's this guy who is a writer. He goes to Germany for like a writing fellowship, and there are other people there. They all live in this like big mansion kind of, and they're all working on their own projects. His project is kind of like tracing the idea of the self through poetry throughout time, kind of a thing. But he ends up not getting very much work done, and instead he watches a lot of like Netflix, I assume, you know, as we do when we're trying to avoid writing. So he's watching this cop show, and within the cop show there are these lines that kind of don't fit with the rest of the plot. And because he studies poetry and he's very well read, he understands these allusions and he knows where these quotes are coming from. And some of them are just from like really dark poetry. Some of them are kind of like taken out of context, or a line is purposely left out so that the message of these quotes is very like nihilistic, very much like humans are inherently at war with everyone. You must get rid of your enemies in order to be safe. You must not let anyone in. And just basically that, like, you know, police are doing the real work of like keeping evil at bay while the rest of us are not really aware of the evil in the world, and we just get to sit here and like theorize about the evil of the world. And the show is called Blue Lives, so I'm sure that was intentional. Okay, so he ends up meeting this guy at like a party. He ends up meeting the writer of the show, like the showrunner who put in all of those quotes. And they start kind of discussing the ideas, but as they're discussing the ideas, the main character really gets kind of like sucked into a spiral. And as he is talking with this guy and then eventually just kind of like communicating through these weird online forums, like of course it descends into like this weird online world. It's very much like a neo-Nazi philosophy. They end up like coming to the house where he's working and really like bullying him and trying to like trick people. But the whole kind of crux of their conversation and debate is, you know, the main character believes that diversity is good, tolerance is good, different perspectives are good, and Anton, the other guy, thinks that that is just very foolish and that that will lead to our downfall. So it's no coincidence that this is set in Germany, which has this history of Nazism and their role in World War II, but currently they have become kind of a haven for refugees from like war-torn and famine-stricken countries in North Africa. Angela Merkel has, you know, set up a lot of those programs, but not everybody agrees with them. And there are a lot of people who think that that is dangerous and bad for Germany. So anyway, by interacting with these like neo-Nazis, essentially, like very intellectually shiny neo-Nazis, the main character really just like is destroyed. He kind of just like goes into this spiral and it doesn't turn out well for him. But eventually he ends up at home in New York, and it's election night 2016. So his wife, who had been at home this whole time, she is very smart. She's a New York lawyer. She had volunteered for Hillary's campaign. She has all these people over who did the same thing, and they're so excited to watch the results of the election. And then they are blindsided by the results, as many of us were. So I think what it's kind of trying to say, and I feel like I know this from a little bit of experience, like I just remember in grad school, there were some people in my classes who professed ideas very similar and in a very similar way to the people in these books. So I think like Hari Kunzru got a lot of like the rhetoric and stuff, you know, from how people really talk online and from these, you know, just their xenophobic movements cloaked in, you know, like protection, like America first or Germany first or whatever, that kind of a thing. I mean, this type of thinking is absolutely not American. This is like these kind of right-wing groups and nativist groups are really on the rise all around the world. So I think that's also what he's kind of trying to warn us about. So anyway, on his own, and he's really like isolated himself from society. He's like no match for these guys, and they pretty much ruin him. And then his wife, who is very connected to her community, but fairly unaware of these other ideas that are circulating out there, is just blindsided by the election and doesn't even understand that these ideas are growing. So I think there's, you know, kind of a warning about those two extremes. Not engaging so much with neo-Nazis that it sends you down Facebook comment spirals. Not that I have any experience with that. but also not isolating yourself so much and living in such an echo chamber that you are unaware of what else is going on. And I feel like I have swung back and forth to those two extremes before. So this was a bit of a weird mirror for me, but there is a little bit of redemption at the end. Let me read you a line from the very end of the book. It says, "It's not much, but I can say that the most precious part of me isn't my individuality, my luxurious personhood, but the web of reciprocity in which I live my life. In Anton's world, hospitality is the greatest sin, and the essence of human relations is either subjection or domination." I'm very glad that he wrote that at the end of the book, because I was like not doing well until I got there. And I was like, yes, okay. This idea of reciprocity, that we need each other, whether or not we understand each other, we need each other. We need people in other countries. We need the people in this country. We need people who are immigrants. We need the people who have been here. I've been thinking a lot about this since I finished the book, but that's the important thing to take away from the story, I think. Okay, I'm not keeping my promise about being succinct. Okay, the next book that I read was The Porcupine of Truth by Bill Konigsberg. This is a young adult novel that I got from the Scholastic Book Fair. I really enjoyed this one. The story is really interesting. The characters are great, and their dynamic is just like very different. So the two main characters are this kid Carson, who is a white kid from New York, but he is in Billings, Montana for the summer, and he meets this black girl named Aisha who lives in Montana, and she's a lesbian, and she's been kicked out of her house by her family, and so she needs somewhere to go. He needs a friend, and they find each other. Carson also has a family secret that he's trying to uncover, and they end up going on a road trip. So that whole premise is like really fun. And then the last maybe like fifth of the book or sixth of the book takes a little bit of a turn, and we uncover the secret and learn a bit more about the circumstances behind it. And just the way that the author does this at the end, I just thought was so beautiful, so necessary and wonderful. And I really hope that a lot of students get a chance to read this book and kind of understand the whole history that we learn through this book. So I just thought it was great, and it's really funny, and just like the voices of the characters are awesome. So particularly for high schoolers, I think this is just like perfect. Okay, two more. One of them is an audiobook. So this was the 79th book that I read this year. I needed some more Hari Kunzru in my life because I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess. So I decided to read White Tears, which is another very just like spiraling dark book written at such a high level that it's just his books are such a challenge for me, so I love that. You can kind of tell that this looks like a record. So this book is about records and sounds and race and class and how people build their wealth. It is a ghost story basically, and it's kind of a horror-ish novel. There's some like body switching and stuff. I mean, it's a trip. Like, you really do have a hard time putting it down. It's as stunning and audacious, as challenging as it is terrifying, completely impossible to put down, because there's no good place to stop, because you're just like, oh my gosh, okay, what is happening? And you're afraid that if you do stop reading, you're not going to remember like what frame of mind you were in when you put it down, so you just keep reading. That's kind of how it was with Red Pill also. So I'm going to give you one more spoiler about this one. Fast forward this if you don't want to know. But after all of this, after all the torture that you go through to get to the end of the book, you find out that it's really all about the industrial prison complex. Like, it was there the whole time. I don't know if I would have been able to see it if I knew it, but that's really what it's a commentary on. It's just so good. I can't even take it. So I think I have to read more Hari Kunzru books, even though they just like destroy me every time. Okay, so lastly, the audiobook that I read this month was An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I've been meaning to read that one for quite a while. A road trip was a perfect time to listen to it. I did enjoy the audiobook version. The plot is bizarre. Like, I don't know how Hank Green comes up with what he comes up with. I don't know that it's really a YA novel. I guess so. Like, high school students would probably like it. All of the main characters are in like their early 20s. They were art students, And the book is kind of about like an alien invasion, but also about like YouTube and Twitter and social media and the ways that social media can elevate people to a level of importance that's pretty much just as high as like government officials, but they have none of the same protections or preparedness. It's also about like how the internet gives us the ability to collaborate as a species globally. Like we can all put our heads together and solve problems, or we can all get on the internet and tear each other down and fight with each other, and it's also a very powerful tool for that as well. It's very thought-provoking. It's just, again, like very bizarre. Like the plot line, you're just like, what is happening? Perfect for like a road trip, so I definitely recommend the Audible version. That was book number 80, so we are done. I am tired. I need the rest of my coffee now. Stay tuned to see whether or not I finish 100 books this year. And if you have any recommendations for what some of those next 20 books could be, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.